Hello folks, welcome back. March 27th, very cool day. We've had a couple cold days in a row here in southern Ohio. It's probably only going to be about 35 degrees today. It was about 35 yesterday. We had that cool front push in a few days ago. We still have probably another couple days of some fairly cool weather to be back up in the 60s and even pushing 70 later this week. Long range forecast looks like a lot of upper 50s to mid 60s once we get past this cold spell. So today we're going to talk a little bit about managing the nest this time of year, anywhere from mid-March to early April for this area. If you're farther north, you're going to be a couple weeks behind. If you're very far south, you're already ahead of us. But this is a good information for the newer beekeeper that really isn't sure what they should be doing this time of year. So stick around, and I've got some pretty good little visuals here for us. Now, I've already talked to people that have pulled their mouse guards off, their entry reducers off, and a couple of people that have already opened up their screen bottom boards. Don't do that. Keep your mouse guards on. We're having a lot of cold nights still. Keep your entries reduced down and keep the screens closed up. If you're not using a solid bottom board and you got a screen bottom board, keep it closed up. You don't want the cold drafts blowing in around the nest. What that creates is all this cool air is forcing the nest up. It doesn't matter if it's in a single or in a double. You're forcing the bees up where it's warmer. Keep your entries closed down. I've got most of mine down to about a 4 or 5 inch at the very most. Some of my smaller hives, I've only got about a 2-inch opening. Keep your entries closed down. I really suggest keeping mouse guards on them for at least another 3 or 4 weeks. And keep the screens closed on them. You don't want that cold draft. You can pull the screens out, take your bottom board, scrape it off real good, put it back in, keep things sealed up. If you have all that cold air getting in there, you're just slowing the bees down this time of year. So big tip, keep them closed down, keep the bottoms closed up. Now, coming out of winter, you might have a couple hives that are kind of on the small side. They got a small cluster. Cluster is going to usually be moved off to one side. Typically it's the sunny side of the box, but not always. And they're going to have a small nest going. Last week when I went through, I had a couple boxes exactly like that. They were late summer splits. They just didn't really build up real big, so I overwintered them as a single over winter. And sure enough, when I got into them, they had the nest all moved off to one side. So you open them up. Black frames are going to represent our brood frames. All of this is either going to be empty, comb, or honey. So, you get in there and you're looking at them, and sure enough, yep, you got a queen. She's laying. She's got a nice little nest going. They're healthy. They're just small. So one of the things you're going to want to do is go ahead and get them centered up. Now, you want to do this when you have a couple nice warm days following moving things around. You don't want to disturb them if the next day is only going to be 30 degrees. You want to do this when the weather's in the 50s or 60s. Go ahead and get her moved over. That allows her to expand her nest both directions. If it's against this one wall, they're only going to creep over very slowly. Make sure they got food. Typically right now, what I'm seeing is about 3/4 of a frame of brood, and then I'm seeing nectar from the maple trees and a lot of pollen all around it. So just make sure they got plenty of nectar and food. If there's a frame of honey over against the far wall, you might move it over a little closer. Don't put it against the nest, because if it's right against the nest, they can't clean the frame out and use it to expand the nest into. You might move the honey frame over like 2 frames away from the nest. Again, you're trying to get them to expand both directions by 1 frame. If everything looks good, button them up and come back and check them in about a week. Now, as an option, If you have a couple frames of extra brood in one of your bigger hives, say you've got a hive that is already this time of year got 8 frames of brood, you better be pulling that hive back because it's going to swarm within just a couple weeks. So you can take a frame of brood out of one of the big hives, and what you're going to do is, again, this is going to represent a brood frame. Take an outside frame and slide the brood frame in. Ideally, you want it to be fully capped brood. That doesn't take a lot of bees to keep it warm. It's already generating its own heat. But yeah, go ahead and just slide it into the outside of the existing nest outside. Drop it in there, button it up. If it is capped brood, when you come back in a week, that's going to be completely emerged, probably, or mostly emerged. And the queen's already going to be jumping on it and laying. And remember, 1 frame of brood is going to equal about 2.5 to 3 frames of bees once it's emerged. So you're going to suddenly populate that really good. So do that, button it up, come back in about a week and see how they're doing. So come back in a week or 10 days, nice weather, and you're looking in here, and suddenly you've got not only these 4 frames, but the queen has expanded. So she's going to have expanded to at least 5 frames, if not 6. So you're looking at it and you're like, okay, you've got a tremendous bee population here, but nothing hardly over here, hardly any bees over in here. What you can do to give them a little bit of room, don't go into spring. You can do things like checkerboarding in the summer. You don't want to do that in the spring. You don't want to open the nest up too much too fast. They have to keep the nest warm. So what you can do is take a brood frame, say like an empty brood frame. You're going to go ahead and split this up a little bit. You can do like 3 frames there, 2 frames there, and then you're going to come in with an empty frame. And you can drop it right in there. Here, let's make it look a little bit, say like this is your empty frame. So drop it right in the middle. So now you got a couple frames of brood here, 3 frames of brood there. Empty drawn comb, has to be drawn comb. Don't go putting a bare foundation in there. Not this time of year. They're not drawing wax yet. They're going to jump on this immediately, start cleaning it up. Less than 24 hours later, the queen's going to be on there and she's going to be laying it up. So suddenly, you've got another expansion area for the queen that's right in the middle of the nest. Now, what you do not want to do is, you do not want to split it up and put 2 empties in here. You've divided the nest into 2 separate areas. The queen's going to be on one side or the other. Yeah, they'll jump on these and start cleaning them up, but suddenly, whatever side the queen's on, the opposite side's going to think they're queenless almost immediately. So you can create panic. You don't want to create panic in these nests. So if you're going to go putting a frame in the middle of it, single frame. Never have a single brood frame by itself, and never put more than a single drawn comb in the middle. Those are kind of like the basic rules of nest management when it's in the spring. You can do some things like that in the summer, but not in the spring. It's too cool. The bees are not moving around quite as much. So again, never have a single brood frame by itself. Never put more than a single drawn comb in the middle. No more than 1. Now you can move things around a little bit, but you got to try to keep your nest somewhat together. That'll suddenly give her room. At the same time, they're expanding out to these other frames. As you're looking and watching this, you got to start thinking, okay, every time one of these emerges, you get a big flush of fresh bees. Yeah, you have some older bees dying off as the nest turns over, but they're expanding at a pretty good rate. You got to be thinking, here pretty quick, I'm going to have to put the next box on. Go ahead, button them up. Come back in 7 days for your next inspection. This time of year, you need to be inspecting your boxes every 7 days. Here's another scenario. You're coming out of winter, got 2 boxes, and you open it up, and just like the other one, I've only got 3 frames of brood. You inspect them, got a good queen, she's got eggs and larvae on 3 frames. Yeah, you might have 4 or 5 frames of bees, but your nest is only 3 frames wide. So then you take it and you look and you're like, wow, I got nothing in the bottom box except for empty comb. You probably want to go ahead and actually temporarily remove that bottom box. Close them down. They can maintain their environment a whole lot better. So first thing you want to do is get rid of the bottom box or whichever box is empty. Then just like on the other one, go ahead and center up your nest. Just like we did before. Make sure she's got room to expand on both sides. If you happen to have extra brood that you can steal from another hive, put it on the outside of the nest. Make sure they got a little bit of food not too far away, but you don't want it bumped clear against it to where they can't expand. Button it up, come back in about 7 days, see how they're doing. So I got another scenario here for you. So got this double deep, you open it up and you have 6 frames of brood. You've got 8 to 10 frames of coverage. You're looking good. They're really packed in here. Good laying queen. And you go down and you're like, wow, wait a minute. Queen's not hardly laying in the bottom box. One of the things that caused that, and I touched on it earlier, is you probably have too much airflow. You probably either have your entry wide open or you got the bottom open on your screen bottom board. Otherwise, I've never really had much of a problem with the queens moving down into the bottom box. But if they don't, okay, you can reverse boxes. I don't like to reverse boxes in the spring. Again, we're having a lot of cool nights. We'll have cool nights for several weeks now. What you end up doing is moving all the brood down against the entry, and you have nothing in the top box. Yeah, they will slowly move up just because they're trying to get to a warmer location, which is going up. What I would prefer to do is, how about we take a couple frames out, put 2 frames of brood down there, probably a little more centered than that. Center up our brood nest up here on top. Put it back over. Make sure the queen's got some empty frames on either side. Now, again, what you're doing here is mimicking not only what a lot of people call a chimney effect, but you're mimicking the natural tree cavity, which is kind of narrow and tall. You've put a couple frames down here directly below the existing nest. You've just made a longer column. It gives her room to expand this way. She will go down and expand either way. I think it's a better way than it is either swapping boxes or, again, in cool weather, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not a fan of checkerboarding like a lot of the guys do. I think it sets the bees back a little too much. By checkerboarding, what I'm talking about is actually having a single frame, empty, brood, empty, brood, empty, brood, empty. The bees struggle too much to keep all the brood warm. I just don't like that. I think it sets them back a little too much. It can also cause a little bit too much of a panic first thing in the spring. So if you have a box that's loaded with bees, this is a better option. Keep some frames of brood together, put the other brood directly below it. Again, you're creating a column that can expand both directions. So give that a try. It's a little safer method than the so-called checkerboard. So I hope you find this video helpful. that's geared towards the first, second, third year beekeeper. Nest management in the spring leading up to swarm season is pretty important. The next step is equalization. That would be my next video. We're going to be going through all of the hives, pulling the bigger ones back and boosting up the smaller ones. We want them all about the same size going into the middle of April. That'll be the next video. Appreciate you watching. Hope everybody liked it. Give us a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe for future updates, and I'll see you next time.